Silence. Complete, devastating silence. Attorney Davidson's mouth hangs open. His $3,000 suit suddenly feels cheap. His Harvard law degree means nothing. Judge Caprio leans forward. Eyes like steel. Voice like thunder. Counselor, in 30 years on this bench, I have never witnessed such disrespect for justice. Davidson's hands shake. Papers scatter. The courtroom holds its breath. Your Honor, I can explain. No. One word. Final. Absolute. But how did we get here? How did one of Boston's most arrogant attorneys end up speechless before an 84-year-old judge from Providence? Underscore 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 underscore. The setup. What happens when someone thinks they can outsmart a judge who's seen it all? Attorney Marcus Davidson walked into Judge Frank Caprio's courtroom that Tuesday morning with the swagger of someone who'd never lost a case. His Armani suit, his Rolex, his smug grin, everything about him screamed entitlement. The case seemed simple enough. Davidson represented a wealthy businessman caught speeding through a school zone at 65 miles per hour. The defendant had money, Davidson had connections, and they both believed Judge Caprio would be just another pushover small-town judge. They were about to learn the hardest lesson of their lives. Davidson approached the bench like he owned it. Your Honor, he began with that condescending tone lawyers use when they think they're talking to someone beneath them. My client is a respected member of the community. This minor traffic violation hardly warrants the court's time. But Davidson had no idea who he was dealing with. Judge Frank Caprio had been dispensing justice for over 3 decades. He'd seen every type of criminal, every excuse, every attempt at manipulation. What he couldn't stand, what made his blood boil, was arrogance in the face of endangering innocent lives. Counselor, Judge Caprio replied calmly, tell me about your client's minor violation. Davidson waved dismissively. A simple speeding ticket, Your Honor. Barely above the limit. My client was rushing to an important business meeting. Surely we can resolve this with a small fine and move on. The temperature in the courtroom seemed to drop 10 degrees. Barely above the limit. Judge Caprio's voice carried a dangerous edge. Your client was doing 65 in a 25 miles per hour school zone. At 3:15 p.m. When children were being dismissed. Davidson shrugged. Children are resilient, Your Honor. No harm, no foul. That was his first mistake. But not his last. Judge Caprio leaned back in his chair, studying the attorney like a predator sizing up its prey. 37 years of experience told him everything he needed to know about Marcus Davidson. The man was about to receive an education in respect. Mr. Davidson, you seem very confident about children's resilience. Tell me, do you have children? Yes, Your Honor. 2 daughters. Davidson's chest puffed with pride. How old? 7 and 9. Still smiling, still clueless about what was coming. And where do they go to school? Davidson named an elite private academy in Boston. Brookfield Preparatory. Excellent institution. Judge Caprio nodded slowly. What he said next would change everything. I see. So your daughters attend a school with crossing guards, reduced speed limits, and careful traffic control. Would you be comfortable with drivers doing 65 miles per hour past their school at dismissal time? For the first time, Davidson's smile wavered. Well, that's different. That's a private school with proper security measures. Different how? Judge Caprio's voice cut through the air like a blade. Because your daughters are more valuable than the children at Lincoln Elementary? The courtroom was dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. Davidson's face had gone pale. Your Honor, I didn't mean. What did you mean, counselor? Subscribe now and comment what you think of this confrontation, because what comes next will completely change how you see justice in America. Davidson tried to recover. Your Honor, I simply meant that different schools have different safety protocols. Stop. Judge Caprio's voice wasn't loud, but it carried the authority of 4 decades in the justice system. Let me tell you about Lincoln Elementary's safety protocols. He opened a file folder with deliberate precision. Lincoln Elementary has 847 students. 73% qualify for free lunch. Many walk home because their parents can't afford cars like your client's Mercedes. They have one crossing guard, Mrs. Rodriguez, who's 68 years old and volunteers her time because the city can't afford to pay her. Davidson shifted uncomfortably in his expensive shoes. Now, Judge Caprio continued, explain to me why your client's business meeting was more important than the lives of 847 children. Your Honor, with respect, that's not a fair characterization. Fair. Judge Caprio's eyes flashed with something dangerous. Let me tell you about fair. The judge stood up. All 5 feet 6 inches of him commanded the room like a giant. Fair is when a 7-year-old girl can walk home from school without worrying about being hit by someone doing 65 in a school zone. Fair is when parents don't have to bury their children because someone was late for a meeting. Davidson's throat had gone dry. Your Honor. I'm not finished. The words hit like hammer blows. You walked into my courtroom with your expensive suit and your arrogant attitude, representing a man who endangered nearly 900 children, and you have the audacity to call it minor. But nobody expected what Judge Caprio said next. Mr. Davidson, before I sentence your client, I want you to do something for me. Anything, Your Honor. I want you to call your daughter's school. Right now. Ask them what their policy is for drivers who speed through school zones. Davidson's hands trembled as he reached for his phone. The courtroom watched in absolute silence as he dialed. Brookfield Preparatory. This is Marcus Davidson. Yes, I need to ask about your school zone safety policy. What happens to drivers caught speeding during school hours? The conversation lasted 3 minutes. When Davidson hung up, his face was ashen. What did they tell you, counselor? Davidson's voice was barely a whisper. Immediate police involvement. Criminal charges. Permanent ban from school property. Judge Caprio leaned forward. What he said next would echo through legal circles for years. So let me understand this correctly. The school that protects your children takes speeding seriously enough for criminal charges. But when it comes to other people's children, poor children, children without fancy lawyers, suddenly it's just a minor violation. The silence that followed was deafening. Davidson couldn't speak. Couldn't think. Couldn't breathe. Your Honor, he finally managed, I apologize. I didn't think. No, Mr. Davidson. You didn't think. You didn't think about the single mother working 3 jobs who can't afford to lose her child. You didn't think about the grandfather walking his grandson home. You didn't think about anyone but yourself and your wealthy client. But Judge Caprio wasn't finished destroying the arrogant attorney. You know what the real tragedy is here, counselor? You're supposed to be an officer of the court. You took an oath to uphold justice. But you walked in here today trying to buy your way out of accountability. Davidson tried one last desperate attempt. Your Honor, my client is willing to pay any fine. Your client will pay the maximum fine of $2,500. He will perform 100 hours of community service at Lincoln Elementary. He will attend a defensive driving course. And his license is suspended for 30 days. The businessman jumped up. This is outrageous. We'll appeal. Judge Caprio's response silenced the entire courtroom. Please do appeal. I want every judge in this state to know that I take children's safety seriously. And Mr. Davidson? He fixed the lawyer with a stare that could melt steel. If you ever come into my courtroom again with this attitude, you'll find yourself explaining to the Bar Association why you think rich people's time is worth more than children's lives. Davidson grabbed his briefcase with shaking hands. Your Honor, this treatment is completely unnecessary. Unnecessary? Judge Caprio stood up again, and suddenly the 84-year-old man looked 10 feet tall. Do you know what's unnecessary, counselor? Explaining to parents why their child isn't coming home because someone was late for lunch. Nobody expected what happened next. Not even Davidson. Before you leave my courtroom, Mr. Davidson, I want you to understand something. I've been a judge for 37 years. I've seen murders, robberies, domestic violence cases that would give you nightmares. But you know what disgusts me most? Davidson stood frozen. Lawyers who think justice is for sale. Attorneys who believe money trumps morality. Counselors who forget that their job is to serve justice, not subvert it. The judge's voice dropped to almost a whisper, but every word carried the weight of decades. You are a disgrace to your profession. The words hit Davidson like physical blows. His face went white. His legs almost gave out. In 30 seconds, Judge Caprio had destroyed not just his argument, but his entire sense of self. Your Honor. Davidson's voice cracked. I have a family to support. A reputation to maintain. So did the children you endangered have families depending on them. So does Mrs. Rodriguez, the crossing guard your client nearly killed. The courtroom was witnessing the complete annihilation of an arrogant man's ego. Judge Caprio sat back down, but his presence still dominated the room. Mr. Davidson, you'll receive a copy of today's proceedings. I suggest you frame it and hang it in your office. And every time you think about taking a case where you'll argue that money matters more than human life, I want you to remember this moment. Davidson couldn't speak. Couldn't move. The man who had walked in like he owned the world was leaving like a broken child. Court is adjourned. The impact of Judge Caprio's words spread far beyond that courtroom. Within hours, video of the confrontation had spread across legal blogs and social media. #JusticeCaprio became trending worldwide. Law students at Harvard were discussing it in their ethics classes. The Massachusetts Bar Association issued a statement about maintaining dignity and respect in legal proceedings. But for Davidson, the consequences were immediate and devastating. 3 of his biggest clients dropped him within a week. His law firm held an emergency meeting about his conduct. His daughter's school asked him to resign from the parent board. What do you think about Judge Caprio's handling of this case? Comment below if you believe arrogant lawyers deserve this treatment, because the long-term impact of this moment changed everything. 6 months later, Davidson was working at a small family law practice, taking divorce cases and custody disputes. His days of representing wealthy clients who thought they were above the law were over. Judge Caprio, meanwhile, continued doing what he'd always done, dispensing justice with wisdom, compassion, and an iron will to protect the innocent. The case became legendary in legal circles. Not because of the sentence, that was fairly standard. But because of the way Judge Caprio had systematically dismantled the arrogance and entitlement that too often corrupts the justice system. Students at Providence Law School now study the transcript as an example of judicial authority properly exercised. The American Bar Association uses it in their ethics seminars. And every time a young lawyer thinks about cutting corners or selling their integrity, someone inevitably asks, do you want to end up like Davidson? The lesson was clear and brutal. In Judge Frank Caprio's courtroom, justice isn't for sale. And arrogance is the most expensive mistake you can make. Years later, when asked about that day, Judge Caprio would say simply, some people think the law is a game they can win with money and connections. My job is to remind them that justice is about protecting the innocent, not the influential. Davidson never practiced law the same way again. And every time he drove past a school zone, He slowed down to exactly 25 miles per hour, remembering the day an 84-year-old judge taught him the most important lesson of his career. True power isn't about having the most expensive suit or the richest clients. True power is about standing up for those who can't stand up for themselves. And in Frank Caprio's courtroom, that lesson is taught one arrogant attorney at a time. But the story doesn't end there. The ripple effects of that day changed everything. Within 48 hours, the video had been viewed over 5 million times on YouTube. Legal experts from across the country were calling it the most devastating judicial takedown in modern American history. Harvard Law School requested a copy of the transcript for their professional responsibility course. Davidson's former colleague, attorney Jennifer Walsh, watched the video in her office and immediately called him. "Marcus, what were you thinking? I've never seen anything like this." Davidson's voice was hollow. "I wasn't thinking, Jen. That's the problem. I walked in there believing my own hype, and Judge Caprio destroyed me with simple human decency." The legal community's reaction was swift and merciless. The Massachusetts State Bar received 347 complaints about Davidson's conduct within the first week. The American Bar Association issued a statement: "While Attorney Davidson's behavior doesn't constitute grounds for disbarment, it serves as a stark reminder that our profession's reputation depends on treating all clients and cases with equal dignity and respect." But the most devastating blow came from an unexpected source: his own daughters. 9-year-old Emma Davidson had seen the video at school when a classmate showed it on their phone during lunch. That evening, she asked her father a question that would haunt him forever. "Daddy, why did you say poor kids aren't as important as me and Sarah?" Davidson couldn't answer. "How do you explain to a 9-year-old that you'd lost your moral compass so completely that you'd argued their lives were worth more than other children's?" Meanwhile, Judge Caprio was receiving praise from an unexpected quarter. The National Association of Elementary School Principals sent him a letter of commendation. Parent groups across Rhode Island were calling for more judges, like Judge Caprio, who actually care about our children's safety. Even police officers were sharing the video, saying it perfectly captured their daily frustration with wealthy drivers who thought traffic laws didn't apply to them. But Judge Caprio remained characteristically humble. In an interview with Providence Journal, he said simply, "I didn't do anything special. I just reminded everyone in that courtroom that children's lives have value, regardless of their parents' bank accounts." The aftermath revealed the true extent of Davidson's fall from grace. His law firm, Cromwell, Davidson and Associates, held an emergency partners meeting 3 days after the video went viral. Senior partner Robert Cromwell delivered the news personally. "Marcus, we've known each other for 15 years. You're a brilliant attorney. But this video has become a liability we can't ignore. 3 major clients have already dropped us, and 2 more are threatening to leave if you remain a partner." Davidson nodded slowly. He'd been expecting this conversation since the moment he'd walked out of Judge Caprio's courtroom. "I understand, Robert. I'll clean out my office by Friday." But the business consequences were only the beginning. Davidson's wife, Catherine, confronted him that same evening. She'd received calls from other parents at their daughter's school, some supportive but many asking uncomfortable questions about her husband's values. "The worst part," she told him, "isn't the embarrassment. It's realizing that the man I married somehow became someone who could argue that other people's children matter less than ours." The conversation led to a separation that became permanent 6 months later. In the divorce proceedings, Catherine's attorney cited irreconcilable differences in moral values as grounds for dissolution. Meanwhile, at Lincoln Elementary School, something beautiful was happening. The attention from Judge Caprio's viral moment had brought unexpected support to the underfunded school. Donations poured in from across the country. A wealthy businessman from California sent $50,000 specifically for crossing guard equipment and safety measures. Mrs. Rodriguez, the 68-year-old volunteer crossing guard mentioned in court, became a minor celebrity herself. Local news stations interviewed her, and she used her moment of fame to advocate for better school zone safety across Providence. Judge Caprio didn't just protect our children that day, she said in a television interview. He reminded everyone that our children deserve protection too. The transformation in legal education was equally profound. Professor Sarah Mitchell at Yale Law School added the Caprio-Davidson case to her legal ethics curriculum. This case study demonstrates how quickly professional arrogance can destroy both moral authority and career prospects, she explained to her students. Notice how Judge Caprio never raised his voice or used inflammatory language. He simply asked the attorney to apply his own standards consistently. The devastating effect came from Davidson's inability to justify his double standard. A year later, Davidson was working at a small storefront legal clinic in Cranston, Rhode Island. His clients were mostly working-class families dealing with landlord disputes, traffic violations, and minor criminal charges. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was now representing exactly the type of people he'd once dismissed as beneath his notice. But something had changed in Davidson during that year. His colleagues at the clinic noticed it first. Marcus arrived here angry and bitter, said clinic director Maria Santos. But watching him work with our clients now, you can see he's learned something profound about what justice really means. Davidson himself acknowledged the transformation in a rare interview with a legal trade publication. Judge Caprio didn't just humiliate me that day. He forced me to confront who I'd become. I'd spent so many years representing wealthy clients that I'd forgotten why I became a lawyer in the first place, to help people who couldn't help themselves. The ripple effects spread throughout the legal profession. Law schools began using the video as a teaching tool. Bar associations incorporated it into continuing education. Young attorneys watched it as a cautionary tale about maintaining humility. But perhaps the most lasting impact was on the children of Lincoln Elementary. 5 years later, several students from the school wrote letters to Judge Caprio, thanking him for standing up for their safety. One letter, from a student named Miguel Rosales, particularly moved the judge. Dear Judge Caprio, I was in 3rd grade when you protected our school from the speeding car man. My mom told me what you said about how all kids matter the same. That made me want to become a lawyer too, so I can help protect other kids like you did. Thank you for showing me that grown-ups should fight for what's right. The case had become more than just a viral video, it had become a symbol. Legal scholars pointed to it as a perfect example of how the justice system should work, not favoring wealth or status, but protecting the vulnerable and holding everyone accountable to the same standards. Davidson, now remarried to a public school teacher and working exclusively with low-income clients, sometimes reflected on that day in Judge Caprio's courtroom. People ask me if I regret what happened, he said in a 2029 interview. How can I regret the moment that taught me what justice really means? Judge Caprio didn't destroy my career, he saved my soul. Judge Caprio, now 89 and still serving, continues to dispense justice with the same combination of wisdom and compassion that made him famous. When asked about his legacy, he always gives the same answer: I don't want to be remembered for embarrassing one arrogant lawyer. I want to be remembered for protecting children who couldn't protect themselves. The brutal moment had become a beautiful lesson. True authority comes not from power or wealth, but from the courage to stand up for those who need protection most. And in courtrooms across America, that lesson continues to echo every time a judge chooses justice over convenience, truth over profit, and children's safety over adult arrogance. The video remains one of the most watched legal proceedings in internet history, not because it was brutal, but because it was true. And sometimes, the truth is the most powerful force in any courtroom.